story. The National Prosecuting Authority in the Northwest Province, you might remember, told us last night that prosecution of the police who opened fire and killed 34 striking miners in Marikana on the 16th of August 2012 are yet to be charged. Now, of course, when police are accused of wrongdoing, the independent police watchdog, IPIT, has to take up that investigation. So that process, along with a lack of capacity and the matter being moved between provincial NPA structures to national and then back again, has seen relatively little progress. But what has happened in the past 11 years is that the state has paid some compensation to the victims or their families. South Africa's Solicitor General, Fhedzisani Pandelani, says government has so far paid over 330 million rand to families. Of course, they sued the state after the Marikana Massacre. He joins us now. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to just ask you to help us break down the money that has been paid and my understanding of where it's gone and how it's gone. I've spoken to Seri, and they explained that there's an amount of 71 million rand that was actually paid out to the families of the mine workers who actually died on that day, and I think on one of the days before. And that, they say, is an amount of 71 million rand or thereabouts, and that covers essentially the loss of income, the loss of support that those families would have had from that breadwinner no longer earning money. They are saying to me, though, that there are other claims that have to be paid, which relate to trauma and loss of those families who lost their loved ones. Talk to me about where that process is.
Thank you for hosting me, Sally. Yes, indeed, we had a press briefing today in relation to the status in the management and coordination of state litigation relating to the Marikana matters. And indeed, we have paid to Siri 71,230,491 rand in relation to the 34 families that they were representing, and these will be those that have perished as a result of that unfortunate incident. There is then another leg that they say must be considered by government. If indeed we were to accept that were to be accepted, it will be in the realm of an ex gratia payment. Because, as you would know, in South Africa, we do have a principle that is called once and for all rule. So when you lodge a claim, you don't actually deal with those claims piecemeal. You finalize the claim in totality. There is then the new concept called constitutional damages, which is what they are relying on, which was introduced, in the life acid demanding matter. It is not an issue that has been pleaded on the papers. Because as and when we settled on the claims that were lodged to us, and we have covered all the families, but two families, I think, that aspect, because they lodged claims for 36. So the matter in relation to constitutional damages, and I empathize with their stance. It's not something that falls within my mandate, and that is why it is now being court managed by the Deputy Judge President in Pretoria. Since last year, when we had the last briefing, it was intended that that issue would have been dealt with, but up to so far, it has not been resolved. But as I indicated, those that we represent are saying you cannot have a second bite on the cherry. That's where we are. Okay. And as creatures of instructions, I cannot actually take and pledge taxpayers' money on something that has not been pleaded.
Can I just jump in there, because they're saying the exact opposite. They're saying that there were 5 different claims. One has been settled, and now they're moving on to the loss of support. They've moved on from the loss of support, which was just looking at the monetary loss. But they say that the state has yet to pay out for the emotional loss that these families went through. So I don't understand how you can't say, all right, let's deal with the second part of this now, because they say that there were 4 or 5 different types of claims that date back to the very beginning of when they started representing these families, which is in 2015. They say it's not a situation where people are suddenly coming in now and saying, oh, hang on, we know our late Uncle Tim and we think that we should get money for emotional loss. They say it was there all along. And they say that there are 300 people linked to these 34 families, I believe, that were always there and always due that specific compensation. What's your response to that?
My response, Sally, is, and I don't want to be dismissive because we're dealing with a highly emotive issue here. When you lodge a claim on the same papers, you don't deal with settlement on a piecemeal basis. If you go back to our response in 2021, the approach then was to plead with government to make ex gratia payments. Now, to the extent that we believe that we've paid, compensation to the families that had a nexus where they were breadwinners, we now need to deal with all the other people that you are referring to, cousins, nieces, nephews, and so on and so forth. That is the category of people that you are talking about, the 300 plus. It is based on emotional, trauma and related aspects. There is no such principle that has been established as at the time when we offered and there was an acceptance of that amount of 71,230,000 rand. So we are saying to the extent that you believe that you are entitled, to have an extended claim, be it in a globular sum for all these other people. Because if you look and drill down on the 300 and so claimants, there is a discord on the relationship with the deceased. And you then need to make a determination with the clients to say, where do we then get the resources to pay for this? So we have left that and we have not closed the door, Sally. We have said we want the court to make a determination first on liability, then we can deal with the quantum. If indeed it is something that is sustainable. I will give you an example. You've got the duty of care to those that are in fact dependent on you. That will include your kids and any other person that can demonstrate that they are relying on you to survive. Now, if post facto we pay your family 71 million rand, and we've got and for lack of a better word, we get other relatives that come and say, we also are entitled to pay. Is government not required to say, okay, show us the nexus between those that died and the liability that you are now raising? That is what we're talking about when we say constitutional liability. And that is why we are saying, let the court decide. It is taking so long for that matter to be court managed, but there is no way that we can convince government and their clients to pay something that is not, in fact, premised on legal principles as we understand them.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate your time. Clearly at odds. Listen to what the Solicitor General is saying and what Seri is saying. They're saying very, very different things. The matter is being dealt with in court. And just if you're wondering, the rest of the money, that 71 million paid to the families for loss of support when their breadwinners died. The other amounts, the 170 million, 160 million, those are for separately the injured miners and also the miners that were arrested. So that's what the state has paid out. They're not closing the door, but they say this has to be determined by a court going forward. And they say that those settlements are normally paid in one sum. It's not paid in phases. All right, we'll have to see where that story goes. That, of course, was South Africa's Solicitor General, Fhedzisani Pandelani, speaking to us this evening. And, of course, 11 years ago, yesterday, Marikana Massacre. All right, so